It's Ron, and I'm here with Yaroslav, and we're back again talking document retention policies in SharePoint 2010. And I wanted to change it a bit now and actually look at how to actually set it in SharePoint. And we had gone through the example before where we said we'll do it like an accounting firm used to do it in the past. So we do project work for a client. The working papers for each year's project with a client we don't need to keep. But let's say I needed to keep the contract and my invoices. And typically what we do is all the working papers and stuff we would like to archive, but specifically the contract and the invoice, we want to keep them for 7 years for accounting purposes. And after the current year, we move them to a record center. Or we move them out of the file room essentially and down to a storage locker. And we're calling a storage locker like a record center. And so maybe you could show me a little bit on here. Could the Olivier cam zoom in on the laptop?
So one thing I wanted to mention is that obviously what we see here is a subject obviously to governance, and there's rules that enterprise has to set before this is implemented. But
they're policies.
Exactly.
What do we do with documents?
And then that will take majority of your time. But right now we're looking at our intranet, right? We've seen this in our last video. I'm going to go to the shared documents library, which is a typical document library in SharePoint. And what would be nice here is to declare something as a record.
Now, when you declare it as a record, this is when you can put the policies on it to say keep for 7 years, retain it for 7 years, then delete it, or retain it for 7 years and then move it somewhere. So how do you declare a file as a record?
As a record, right? So in SharePoint 2010, you can do in-place record declaration and also send the file to a record center.
So how do you declare it as the record?
As an in-place record. So let's enable in-place record declaration. I'm going to go to the library, library settings, and of course in here we just have one library, but you would script this particular sequence of steps. I'm going to click Information Management Policy, pick the type of my document, and in here I have something called retention, and I can enable retention and add a retention stage. You can have more than one. And in here I can have a time-activated retention. So I could say, okay, when a document is created, or let's say when a document is declared as a record.
That's more the way it works, because the manager or the project manager or senior manager on a project, they need to say at the end of the project, okay, once this document's created, I'd now like to declare it as something that I need to keep. So then before that, we need to activate in-place record declaration. So I'm going to go back to my document library settings, and under record declaration settings, I could say that allow for manual record declaration. When you click OK, and I guess you could automatically do it too, couldn't you, with workflow? Like you could say you could set a metadata tag on a document that would say, if I set this document to be an invoice, then I'd like you to automatically kick off the document retention.
And it's pretty easy to do with tools like...
Let's do the manual thing.
Let's do the manual, so in here right away I have this declare as a record option. So it says, hey, do you want to declare it as a record?
Oh, now, hang on. Can anybody do this, or can we set up their security so only a manager could do it?
You can set up a security. And the same thing based on the... Because this is something that's, sort of a temporary as a record, right? You don't want to keep your working documents with all of the records. So you could, but it's going to be a bit of a mess, right? Your files along with working documents. So this is something that will probably be temporary and then go to the record center at the end, as you said. So you can set it to the record center, which is another site on SharePoint, and we'll promise we'll talk about that next time. But from the perspective of sending it right now, you can send it to the record center.
Oh, okay. So you have to set up the record center.
Exactly.
Which essentially becomes like another sub-site with a library.
It's another site. So here I have an example of a record center. We'll take a look at it next time of how the routing of documents happens.
And then you've got some folders in the record center.
I have a couple of folders here where, for instance, record library 1, record library, where my records are going to end up at. And
so if I had a meta tag on a document that said it was a 2007 project, it could archive it to the 2007 folder with some rules on that.
Absolutely.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, very cool.
So one thing, going back to that retention policy that I was showing earlier, in here you can say enable retention, and as soon as you declared something, for instance, as a record, once it's declared as a record, plus let's say next day, or whatever time you want, you could move it to our record center.
And how would I say keep it for 7 years?
So keep it for 7 years is by default, everything is capped, right?
Okay.
But once you declared something as a record, you know, it sits there for 7 years, or as long as nobody deletes it.
And they can't. Well, how do we make it so they can't?
Nobody delete it. Well, as soon as it's declared as a record, nobody can modify it or delete it automatically.
So if it's declared as a record, so can I set up multiple
stages?
Retention policies?
Yes, absolutely. You can.
So the first thing I could do this for me. Add two. The first thing, declare it as a record. And the next day, after it's been declared as a record, move it to the record center.
Move it to the record center, yeah.
Okay, so
that's you want to move it, right?
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
To the record center. Okay, good. I'll say okay on that.
Yeah.
And then we'll add one more that says, once it's declared as a record, keep it for delete it after 7 years.
Delete it after 7 years. So declare it as a record, 7 years. Move to recycle bin or permanently delete. So you can permanently delete that.
Permanently delete. Okay, perfect. Okay.
So there you go.
So there you go. So you've now declared it as you've got something that we set it up so by a security group you could manually or through workflow declare something as a record. So I've got let's say I've got a project folder in SharePoint, and I've gone to my invoice, and the senior manager at the end of the project can declare this as an invoice or declare it as the statement of work.
Just click a button.
And the retention policy could move it and leave a link behind and move a copy over to the document record center. And then enforce a retention policy of delete it after 7 years, but force it not to be deleted for those 7 years.
So your intranet is clean automatically, and your records are in the right place.
Yeah, and we could have it moving stuff at the end of projects and archiving project work.
Absolutely, and you can kick off an approval workflow saying, hey, you know, an automatic approval workflow will say, do you approve this deletion or archiving?
So don't even declare it as a record right away. If they declare it as a record, or when you switch in the work, switch a meta tag to say, I'd like to make this an invoice, it could kick off a workflow that looks for approval before they can declare it as a record. Or ask somebody else in the organization, like an accounting department, to declare it as a record. And then archive it. And it could be archived to an accounting folder or archived to a project folder, or however you want. Oh wow! Yeah, that's really neat. I'm glad I got to see how it's actually implemented in SharePoint. Okay. Hey, where can people find you on the web?
So sharematch.com is my blog, and I also work at Knowledge Tech.
And it's rondajuicy.com, and I'm at Knowledge Tech. Thanks.